Gentlemen, it looks like most everybody's here. We're going to go ahead and get started a couple minutes early. I'd like to welcome you this morning to a subject that is not easy for us to talk about by any means, but one that certainly has been in the news and been talked a lot about in the Obama presidency, and certainly as time goes on, the reality is mental health is a major important issue of the day, and it is something that the more that we understand about it, the better we are equipped to handle it, not only for ourselves, but certainly for our family and our neighbors, and certainly in the body of Christ, how we need to understand this and help one another out. There was certainly a time when depression, mental health was looked down upon greatly, simply because if you had anything wrong, that you likely had a demon or something like that, and because of that, it's been a very debated subject for many years. But in this era of time that we live in, we are privileged to have a lot more openness, we have a lot more resources, and especially in the community of the body of Christ, we certainly help one another out with the problems that depression can create. So this morning, I can give you a skim of the surface of something that would really take weeks to really do the best job with. But today, I'm thankful for this time that we have, this 45 minutes to share together, and I want to give you good information. I do have handouts available that you can get through my email. I'm happy to send them to you just because we take up so much paper. We're trying to save more trees and not waste here. So if you'd like to have a slide presentation, you're welcome to please drop me an email. I'll be happy to send that to you. Just by introduction, my name is Rich Watson, and I am privileged to be a counselor with Christian Counseling and Psychological Services, and have been for now 29 years. They put up with me, which is pretty nice. And in that time, gentlemen, I have grown, I have developed a lot in my own personal life. And if I were to take the time to tell you my story, it would be that I too have suffered depression, anxiety. I certainly know the difficulties that brings, and I'm very thankful today to be able to share with men. And I have to tell you, quite honestly, this is a moment of intrepidation for me, because the majority of my life I grew up being very afraid of men, and how the Lord would call me to work with men in counseling, and of course their marriages and their families and so forth. It kind of blows my mind that He would do that, but what a transformation that He has brought into my life, and how grateful for that I am. So the material I want to give you, it's both hopefully very relevant to you, that's hands-on, practical, but also given to you from a good sound background. So this morning, if we could take a minute to pray together, and then we'll get started into our topics. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for these wonderful gentlemen that are here today. Father, from wherever they come from whatever need they may have, Lord, I pray that today in this time that you will minister to them. You use this information to help them, not only to help themselves, but to help their friends, their families, the community, your church, and even in the workplace, Father, that we might have a greater understanding of how wonderfully you created us, and how important it is to understand that how we are created was thoughtfully and intricately done by you. Thank you for that. So bless our time, and bless our subject that we talk about today. In Jesus' name, amen. So the concept of depression, the real story that we want to present today is that it's a very misunderstood subject, and that many Many times we think of depression in the form of someone who is sad or melancholy, someone who perhaps is lazy, somebody who doesn't have it all together. But the truth of the matter is depression is a mental illness, and it comes in many different forms and sizes and shapes. Guys, I think that one of the biggest challenges of bringing this subject today is that we experience depression differently than women do. While there are some similarities, of course, there are certainly uniquenesses. In the studies that have been done through the years, I'm going to refer to a greater part of this part of our discussion from Terrence Real, who wrote a book, I Don't Want to Talk About It, The Myth of Male Depression. In writing that, he gives us a nice understanding and helpful both to men and to women that this is a subject that is it is greatly misunderstood and often misdiagnosed and overlooked. So from a practical perspective, we would say that women to men are often more diagnosed with depression simply because they're more willing to admit it. They're more willing to go to the doctor and talk about it and talk to friends, their female friends and so forth, so that the studies are somewhat unbalanced because a lot of them obviously don't want to talk about it. One of the ironies of depression is that it is what it creates and also what it hides. So if you don't get anything else out of today, one thing that's very important in our dealing with our emotions and so forth is that it gets worse as we drive it down. It gets worse as we try to hide it. It gets worse as we try to pretend like everything's okay, as our slide here shows, that on the outside I can look happy-go-lucky, but on the inside I can be a real mess. And that mess can often, unfortunately, break down into very criminal-like behavior. It can become very, let's say, bent toward addictions such as pornography, drugs, alcohol, sex, so forth and so on. And one of the bigger ones that we have seen over the past few years, past couple of decades actually, is gambling and how that also plays a very big role in depression. Terrence also suggests that one of the things that we have to look at and try to understand is that we, when we get sucked into the forces of depression, is that it's kind of like a cyclical conflict. It's like a spiral going down, and before we generally catch it, we tend to be in a very difficult and more difficult place, such as the different types of depression, from a very generalized to a very major depression. The gentleman that I like to refer to is Dr. Herb Atkinson, the late Dr. Herb Atkinson, and he always would say to his patients that came in and talked about depression is that generally the patient's the last to know. And everyone can see, that you're changing, you're despondent, you're withdrawn, you're often quiet, you won't talk, you cave in, so forth. And because of that, we may not realize it's depression when everyone else can see that it is. So in the heart of us this morning, gentlemen, I think depression is seen unmanly. It carries to many a double stain, the stigma of mental illness, and also the stigma of feminine emotionality. Depression in men is a condition that is experienced as both shame-filled and shameful, and it goes largely unacknowledged both by men who suffer and those who surround them. Putting that in a nutshell, what is that saying? I think it tells us that that we resist. We resist naturally. Let's take a minute and talk together. Who in the Bible comes to your mind that may have suffered this kind of depression that Terence Real was talking about? Go ahead.
King Saul.
King Saul, yeah. Boy,
Job.
He really would, didn't he? Through his time, yes. Others?
Job.
Job, absolutely, yes.
David.
David. And David many times says that my soul is in anguish within me, and he cries out, you know, for God to see his spirit. He runs, he hides to try to avoid it, but the reality is that he's certainly stuck in his his disappointment, his feeling of failure, his reality that I've sinned against God, I've blown it. You know, we could just go on through the list. And Terence Real talks about the importance of understanding that within ourselves, a lot of our depression comes from the feeling of, I blew it, I did wrong, I sinned, I didn't quite make the prize, I didn't meet the expectations. And so all that is driven down into, and how does that make you feel? Now, I don't mean to be too cliche-ish, but how it makes us feel is that, well, I just have to shut that off and I have to pretend as if it didn't happen. And when we're caught in our sin and when we're left in the pain and agony of our wrongs done, that one more time I wasn't going to do that. I was going to stop that. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I was going to, and then on and on and on we go. And the more this is created and the less opportunity that we have to share that, to speak that out, to be honest about it, the reality is that creates depression. A depression that we're again talking about here is in that same concept of when I think of every action is a reaction. So if I do A, what is B's reaction? Well, if we're whole-minded, if we're doing well, we're going to do the next best right thing, if I might borrow that from AA. That's a thought that we have. We certainly think of that in our Christian life, in our walk with God. I certainly heard that in Gordon's message this morning, you know, that if I'm doing it right, if I'm on that relentless path, then I'm doing good. But if I get off that path and I don't have someone around me to help guide me back on that path, then I'm going to spiral down, and I'm left with that. And so the great verse that Corey read this morning, iron sharpening iron, brothers, we really need one another. We need each other to lift one another up and understand the challenges and the difficulty that we experience. So that's kind of getting into, it's a reality. We do experience depression. We've known great men, great warriors, great conquerors, great men of the Bible, and even Jesus himself at times felt the pain of his mental anguish, so much so the drops of blood that he poured out from his forehead in the anguish of those emotions. That reality was taking on the sin of the world and how that obviously made him feel. So there's a story. Every one of us here has a story, right? We all come from different backgrounds. We all come from hardships and trials and challenges of life, of course. So in that story, we could spend a lot of time talking about how that feels and how that's impacted our life. Terence Real, once again, along with other good authors like T.D. Jakes and certainly John Eldridge in his book Wild Heart, and others that we know that have spoken out and have made a proclamation for men to understand, yes, we are created to be strong, we're created to be warriors, we're fixers, we're doers, we're going to go out there and get them, right? And yet there are barriers, you know, that stand in our way from doing that. And the goal this morning would be that shame wouldn't be that thing that holds us back, that gets in our way. So how do we get rid of that shame, and what do we do with it? I'd like to hold that off to the side just for the moment and talk a little bit about what else is going on in this concept of depression, and talk a little bit more about, so what's going on in the brain? How is the brain functioning, and what's going on there that challenges our emotions and our thoughts and the conflicts and challenges that we share. And as we think about the brain being the kind of the control tower of our decision making, of our behavior, and all the aspects of our life, there's billions and billions of neurotransmitter cells in them working. And if you can think of it, guys who are our great technology guys with creating motherboards and that kind of thing, we know that electrical current at the right speed, at the right time, can do a great deal. But if that gets blocked in some way, we're not going to get the response that we need. Electricians and those that do that kind of work know that what's at the source, if the source is not right, if it's imbalanced, if it has a surge, it's going to cause problems, right? So in our brain, our control tower, everything that is going on there has a lot to do with how we're thinking, how we're feeling, what's our mood like, all those very important details. The concept that also that comes along with that is an important one in trying to understand what's going on in the different parts of the brain. And I would like to point out two really important parts. The limbic is the excitable region of the brain. That's where a lot of our emotions and so forth come from. We also have in the part of the brain that is kind of centered down in here, this is like the hippocampus, and we have the amygdala. Well, the amygdala is that excitable little gland in there that's about a nickel size. And if I could go back to Gordon MacDonald's concept again on what happened on 9/11, if you think about that for just a moment, just picture, where were you, what was going on, how were you thinking, how were you feeling, what was going on in your life that day. If I remember it, it was one of the most gorgeous September mornings. I was working at a hardware store, my normal Tuesday morning activity, and everything was going along fine, and then all of a sudden somebody came in and said the towers have been hit. And at first it's like, what? It didn't compute what was going on, and then other people started coming in and saying, turn on the TV or turn on the radio or what have you, and excitement began, and that rush of, oh my goodness, we've been hit, what's going on, and nobody really having answers. But as you look at the videos and the TV memorials and so forth, think about what was going on, just for a minute, just in your sanctified imaginator. What do you remember from the different pictures that you've seen on 9/11? Anybody? What was going on? What were people doing?
Chaos.
Chaos. It was very chaotic.
Fear.
Fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty. Sure. Sure. What were the people doing?
Running.
They were running. Some were running. What else was going on? Jumping on windows, out of buildings. Yes.
Helping.
Helping. Yes.
Anger.
Anger. Yes. Some people crying. Some people falling to the ground, paralyzed. Some people looking up, paralyzed. All different kinds of reactions. And what happened on that event and that morning, and now the things that we remember about that people react differently, and the speed of their reaction is different depending upon who they are, what they're trained in doing, thinking about the EMS, the fire workers and so forth, the police officers that ran into the buildings to save lives, and other people that normally could do this without even a second out of the eye. They froze. They couldn't do anything. So the amygdala is really, really important, and those of you who are doctors and who know more about this than I do, we know that the amygdala is critical, because when the amygdala begins to swell and get larger through that excitement and adrenaline and so forth, the hippocampus of the brain begins to shut down. And think of the hippocampus as like a processing unit of the computer. It takes in all the information, it stores it, it throws it out, it gets the rest of the brain working like it's supposed to do. But if the amygdala is swollen and unable to function the way that it's designed to function, or it is functioning the way that it is designed, our thinking process is shut down. And when our good thinking is shut down, that may lead us to do other things. And sometimes when that is a constant for us in our life, and we're constantly adrenaline driven and so forth, that's going to lead us to, well, I need to suppress those feelings that come, like anxiety, depression, other things that may be experienced that says, help me get away from what I'm feeling right now, because I don't really know how to cope with this. And not knowing how to cope, how to manage it, it causes us to kind of shrink to our, well, let's say, our bad side, our side that says, make it go away. And if a drug makes it go away, if an alcohol makes it go away, if doing illicit other things makes it go away, then I don't have to feel it, deal with it, and I can just go on. So too much adrenaline in the body turns into cortisol. Cortisol in the body stays too long, it becomes toxic. The toxic brain begins to think toxic things, and it wants to, again, run away from the things that are painful and hard to deal with. So depression is a brain thing. It is a mechanical thing that's going on in the brain, and it is also driven by different neurotransmitter important enzymes in the brain. And we have some of the ones that you have probably heard a lot of: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. Those are kind of like the three big ones that we have treated for many years. And doctors, and research scientists, and all that have learned what can help that circuitry go well, and when do we shut it off, and certainly if there's an overage, how to settle it down, or if there's not enough, how to pick it up. And that's where we start getting into, well, on the medical side, can depression be treated with medicine? And the answer is yes, because of the research and work that's been done. They've learned how to work with those different neurotransmitters and getting them to operate at the correct time. And when that happens, now we have better feeling, better thinking, better acting, and we're getting back to normal again. Some of the aversion to medication is, as we know, is it alters your mood, or it makes you feel tired, or it makes you not the same person that you should be, and that sort of thing. Well, the good news is, I'm not here to sell any medication, I promise, is that the combination of helping the brain do what maybe through genetics it can't do on its own, or circumstances like major depression, it creates an imbalance of these, and when that happens, it takes medication to help balance that out. Now, some people can get better over time. I don't know about the disaster that happens in between, but if we can get there sooner, it'd be kind of like saying, Aaron, I want you to go out and go cut this tree down with a screwdriver. And Aaron looks at me and says, well, Rich, usually a chainsaw cuts a tree down. What are you talking about? Well, I think the screwdriver ought to do it. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take you, and I don't know how bloody your hands are going to be, trying to chop away at that tree with a screwdriver. But, it seems really ridiculous to work harder, not smarter, right? Or not use the right tool. And today, we're privileged to have the right medications as the right tool. Using it correctly and appropriately, it can be very, very helpful, along with the other treatments that we offer in counseling and psychology. But just to kind of give you a real quick perspective, norepinephrine has a lot to do with our alertness, concentration, and our energy. Dopamine has a lot to do with pleasure, reward, motivation, why so many people want to feel good. This is what they're trying to achieve. Serotonin has a lot to do with our general mood, anxieties, etc. So keeping a good balance there is very critical. And again, I just want to share with you, this is the beauty of what David wrote for us in Psalm 139, that fearfully and wonderfully am I made. I'm so wonderfully created. God knows my thoughts from afar. He knows my going out. He knows my coming in. He's intricately, intimately aware of every part of me. And so when things are not in balance, as He's created them to be, obviously we're going to have an off balance. And that's where depression often comes from, as well as anxiety. So we want the neurotransmitters to work. We want them to click on, click off at the right time. And if that's happening, then we're moving along in the right and good place. So when we think of a mental disorder, I'd like to first start this with a quote by Dr. Colin Ross, who states, "A disorder is not a disorder until it disorders your life." A disorder is not a disorder until it disorders your life. So it would be ridiculous, wouldn't it, to say that we never feel anxious. It would be ridiculous to say we never feel depression, we never feel sad or down, or any of the other feelings that we have, because that's normal life. Again, that's how God created us. When does it become a disorder? And when is it clinically or medically a concern? It comes with that concept again. How did the neurotransmission get out of balance? And how long has it been out of balance? So if it were a genetic thing, and truly there are folks who have genetic difficulties creating a good balance of these neurotransmitters. On the other side, the stress, the difficulties, and all of the other things that our life behavior may create, even including sin. And so when we put that psychology and the science of medicine alongside of our emotional, mental makeup, we also know there's a spiritual component to that. And the spiritual component is that the Holy Spirit works to convict us when we've sinned. We're thankful for that, right? Because if we didn't have Him there to work through that, we would go on sinning. But the Holy Spirit works relentlessly in convicting us, open our eyes and our mind and our hearts to what are you doing? How are you doing? And when we shut Him down, when we dismiss Him, when we make Him go away, obviously He can't do His work. But when we open our hearts to Him, as well as our mind, amazing what He will do to restore, renew, and reinvent us as He's designed to do. I'm thinking of also Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Probably know it by heart, but it's a beautiful concept that Paul puts together. And after hearing Gordon speak this morning, I'm thinking, wonder what he thinks of this verse. But it's, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is your holy act of worship. Be ye, therefore, transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might prove what the will of God is. In doing so, we're in the process of trying to get those transmitters to work well, and also now be working with a renewed mind. So our mind, remember back to that slide about having control, the brain being in the control tower, we have the ability to redirect our thinking. And in our thinking, we may have gotten distorted, we may have gotten offbeat, we may have been raised with a lot of what we would call in those automatic thoughts, automatic behaviors, automatic responses, a lot of distortions and a lot of disorder. So the mental part of our mental health is, how am I thinking, how am I behaving, how am I feeling? All parts have to work together. And if we can get the best part, if I'm thinking good, and if I'm feeling rough or feeling difficulty, I can put my thinking in front of that and make it so that it's back to the right way. and the standard that God has laid out for us and what He wants us to be as His children. So if not, likely then we're going to have depression. And that depression obviously comes from, again, a sense of shame, a sense of sadness, a sense of sorrow. How do I get back on the right place with God? So a mental disorder is any behavior, emotional state that causes an individual great suffering. We know that people suffer greatly with depression. Does not go away after a reasonable length of time, is self-destructive, seriously impairs the person's ability to work or to get along with others, or cause the person to endanger others or the community. That is the best example I could come up with that helps us understand, again, when does this depression or my thinking become disorderly? And as it becomes disorderly, it would be that someone else is going to get hurt as well as myself. And restoring that, renewing that, changing that is certainly our goal. So let's talk just a little bit about feelings. We all have them, and they come in many different ways. You might remember this from the Inside Out movie, but these are things that, feelings, emotions that, of course, all of us feel in some way or another. So being, how do we express them? And if we're expressing them in healthy, good ways, we're happy, joyful, complete people. If we're not expressing them, if we're pushing them down, and frankly, it's awfully hard to feel a lot of joy when you feel depressed. It's hard to see the future, see good coming out of maybe difficult circumstances. But God is at work, and certainly these are the things that He wants us to experience. Joy, love, peace, all the things that He's designed for us. As far as our mood and our emotions and feelings go, this is my depressed stance, so is Charles Schultz. When you're depressed, it makes a lot of difference how you stand. The worst thing you can do is straighten out and hold your head high, because then you'll start to feel better. If you're going to get any joy out of being depressed, you got to stand like this. So we think about that, and we know that, again, there are some cures for depression simply as what's my attitude toward it? How am I willing to embrace my circumstances and situations that I may experience? And in doing that, I may be able to come through my difficulties much quicker, much faster. But if my stance is down, and I'm definitely in the thinking process of, woe is me, everything is awful, there's no good in the world, everything is bad, God doesn't love me, matter of fact, He doesn't even exist. All those kind of thinkings, we'll call those negative thinking, can certainly take hold and rob us of our joy very, very quickly. Depression cycle works something like this. We have a negative thought, negative feelings, which we would call depression, and then we have negative perceptions. And our goal, as already stated, is to try to begin to get back on the right way of thinking. Now, as we share this, I always have to remember it's always easier to say it than to do it. Okay? It is not easy to say, I'm not feeling well. I can act it out by being angry. I can act it out by being short, hurt, hard to get along with. I can act it out by being miserable to live with. But I'm fine. It's the world that's got the problem, right? You know? But how I see things, and one beautiful thing that we have as Christians and believers is that we have a wonderful Lord to look to, as well as all the things that He wants to accomplish in our life, whether good things or even bad things. How do I know if I have depression? These are some generalized things, feeling sad and anxious, loss of interest or pleasure in activities, weight changes with changes in appetite. That can go either way, either not eating or eating too much, losing or gaining weight. Your sleep changes. You may see that you become more fatigued, loss of energy, etc. Feeling worthless in sense of appropriate guilt, like if I did something wrong, I should feel bad and want to change that. But if I just am constantly eating away at my confidence, eating away at my person, like bad self-esteem, bad thoughts, bad talking about myself, obviously that's in that shame cycle that we want to get out of. Problems concentrating, indecisiveness, even suicidal thoughts, and whether I would carry them out or not, they're reality. I'd like to share a story with you of a recent thing that happened with a gentleman that gave me the privilege to talk about this today. This gentleman came in as a very, very strong believer, loved the Lord with all his heart, with his wife, his children, had a great family, very successful. And as he was beginning to share his story about how he had had great success in so many levels, all of a sudden it's like somebody just took everything and brought it down to this very narrow perspective, and all he could see was failures, could only see things that he didn't do right, all the things that were going wrong in his life, and this is not his normal way of thinking. He experienced that about 2 years ago. I went into a very major depression, took him about 6 months to get out of it, thought everything was okay, and round two came, and when round two came with severe anxiety. Well, anxiety is that shaking, that tremoring, that feeling like an elephant sitting on your chest, feeling like if you're not dying, you'd like to die because it feels so bad. And as he was describing this, tears rolling down his cheeks, please take this away. I've prayed, I've asked God, I've done everything I know to do, and I can't sleep, I can't eat, none of the medications are working. I just don't think I can go on anymore. This is a 70-year-old man, very successful life. What changed? What was so different that up to 68 years, everything was okay. Now all of a sudden, things are not going well. Good life, good family, loves God, loves the church, been on mission trips, done it all. What's different? What's going on? And as time went on, we ended up having him hospitalized because the suicide thinking was relentless. And in this past June, he ended up taking his life. Now, it's hard for me to completely understand that gentleman. I don't know, even as much as I am privileged to know, what could go on in a man's mind where it was so good, and then all of a sudden have this shift, and we couldn't work on it. Medication, other treatments like ECT and so forth, nothing was working. And the anguish that put this man through was relentless. Can't sleep, can't eat, can't do my work, can't see beyond the moment, and all I hear in my head is the rattling of, you're worthless, you're worthless, you're worthless. I do believe that in some folks, the enemy number one will do everything he can to sabotage, to block all the good that the Lord gives us, how the Holy Spirit works in our life, and yet our brain can have some abnormality that brings a person to this point. Now, this is not very common, just so you know. So gentlemen who are young and thinking, when I turn 70, I'm not going to experience this.
Hope not.
But on the other hand, it tells of the vulnerability from our youth all the way up to this present age and even to our elderly years, that all of us are vulnerable. All of us are vulnerable. Okay? And in that vulnerability, we have to do whatever we can to recognize, how am I doing? What's my mental health like? Am I taking care of myself? Am I doing the things that I know are the right or good things for me to be doing. In doing so, we have a better chance of succeeding and overcoming. But to those who really, really struggle with this, whether you know this from a family member, your personal self, to someone in your church, somebody you work with, this is a real medical issue. It's a real medical issue. And just like we would go to the doctor to treat our diabetes or cancer or any other abnormality that we have, our mental health is just as important. It's just as important because it stands the risk of being stolen away, even to the point of suicide. So we must not take this lightly or take it as, oh well, because it's not getting any easier to live life. That is the last time I checked. It's very stressful, and it's getting more and more complicated all the time. And with those complications comes other problems. And this is something that, again, you may know of happening in your church, in your family, community, etc., that abuse is not going away. Children who are spoken poorly to, treated poorly, neglected emotionally, they are at risk for having exactly what we're talking about here today. And as we sit in this room together and we think about our own life and our own story, what we need to go away with is understanding that if I don't deal with my story, it's going to come out in some way. And the way that it might come out, believe it or not, is just what we heard the testimony of this morning when he said, I wasn't going to do the things that were done to me. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to be better than that. I was going to make different choices. And frankly, depression, again, unresolved, not taken care of, not addressed, will be handed down to our children. And sadly, if you have boys, boys are generally more vulnerable because we tend to not look at their emotional needs as much. And we think, hold yourself by the straps of your boots, be tough, be strong, get out there, fight hard, you can do this. And somehow or another, we, as a society, have told boys, told male population, what's going on inside of you. It doesn't matter, we're not interested. Be strong, be tough, be aggressive. Now, I love John Eldridge, and if you haven't read Wild at Heart, I deeply encourage you to read it because he does one of the best things I think anybody has done within the last 50 years, along with James Dobson and others, who have really taken the heart of a man and said, let's not emasculate men. Let's not make them weenies, if you will. What essentially we're saying is it takes a strong man to stand up and say, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, I'm having difficulty, and I'm not sure how I can get through that. And so if we can offer that support to one another, sharpening iron, encouraging one another, why a day like today is so important, it's because we need this, we really do. Sometimes our wives, our girlfriends, our mothers, they're just not going to understand it quite like another guy does. Okay? So accountability and encouragement from one another, we need that. We need that to be relentlessly driven for Christ. There's so much more to say in this, and I want to just offer a few minutes of a question because you've been so patient to listen. Again, I do have slides available for you if you'd like to look at the rest of them. There's several slides on anxiety as well, but at least for this morning, we've introduced the subject. We know it's real, we know it's medical, and it's also very importantly genetic in some families, and some of it just bears down into our story and what we've had to deal with and what we're dealing with. And if you need treatment, the encouragement is go to your doctor, seek out a counselor, seek out brothers to help one another. Okay, any questions that we can answer before we wrap up this?
We're talking about the 9/11 incident. We talked about how people react in different ways, some are going to freeze up. But for those who are trained, firefighters and policemen, the training takes over. So when with that kind of training, what is the brain dynamic that's at play to say, you know, a doctor has the same thing to, if you have an emergency and know the steps to take. So how does that training avert depression, or when the event is over, they could get depressed after that? And I'm sure those who are serving in the military, PTSD is another whole ball of wax.
Absolutely right. Alex, you asked a great question, and I'll try to answer it as quick as I can. If you go back to the picture of the brain, and we look at the limbic system of the brain, that's, again, very much a part of how we think, we restore emotions and memories and that kind of thing. We, in training for EMS, firefighting, police, etc., physicians, are able to bypass that amygdala through exposure. And that exposure, and exposure, and exposure, and exposure trains the brain, this is okay. This is how I'm supposed to think and operate. Having, again, the privilege to be trained in trauma, I am also part of the Barron County Critical Incident Stress Management Team, and we do debriefings following a major crisis for our firefighters, EMS, and police. And 9 times out of 10, the guys will walk through the process. I just did what I knew I was supposed to do. Here's how I did it, how I functioned. I went home, I slept, I had a bite to eat, I did whatever, and I'm just ready to do the next thing. On the other hand, some will say, with all the training, and I've been on the force for 30, 40 years, why this time? What was wrong this time that I can't stop crying? I can't stop just falling apart when I know all these things. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I'll just be butt ugly honest here. When I started going through my depression 6 months ago, I felt all alone, and so I started seeking out who else. Louis Giglio went through it 6 months. Sheila Walsh talks about it. Dr. David Jeremiah just interviewed her on stuff. There's a guy named Tommy Nelson in Texas who he went through it. You can Google these people, you can see their story, you can not feel as alone, you can see how they got through it, and it is a real thing. And what I would suggest and what I do is I just open my mouth and tell people and I cry out loud. Because if you hold it in, you're done.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, sir.
How can you address the fears of somebody not wanting to go in because they're afraid of getting addicted to the drugs that are supposed to help you?
Very good question. The best thing that I know, Don, is education. Just helping people to understand what the med's going to do, and that if they follow the doctor's prescription and dosing and that kind of thing, doctors will start very, very small and then get up to therapeutic level. There's a lot of people listen to the radio, obviously Google, have a lot of information out there. And my encouragement is go to a good solid place like WebMD. That's doctor. A lot of the information comes from Mayo Clinic, and they give you some really good information that way. But frankly, yes, taking that first step into whatever counseling, the doctor, whatever, to say, how are you doing? Well, not so good right now. And being courageous enough to do that. That's our first step, but sometimes it needs another person to come along to help with that. Definitely, yes. We'll have to be, this is our last one for today.
I'm at that age where you don't sustain everything. I'm there, I'm thinking, like when you get down, I don't get the fish right. But everything loses the ball game. But I don't have those issues, and I don't understand it. pressure, but. What's the sign? I mean,
Well, the sign, the
yeah,
signs.
the sign this guy had, I mean, I don't know, I mean,
Right, he actually, we found out that he had really had anxiety when he was younger. By talking with his aged mother, she was able to give information, so that really he'd been suffering all along, but never told him. But he's one of those green apples. Definitely. Well, gentlemen, it's been a great joy being with you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch, and I'll be around if you